Welcome back to the European Cybersecurity Summer Hub. My name is Paul Adamson. I'm the chairman of Forum Europe, and it is my very great pleasure to introduce the first keynote session of this two-day conference. The theme is Cybersecurity and the European Industrial Strategy, Securing the Digital Economy. And to deliver our keynote, we are delighted to welcome Thomas Jessig, who is the Chief Security Officer, CSO, obviously, of Deutsche Telekom AG, where he is responsible for cybersecurity as well as other operational security issues. From 2007 to 2009, he established the Technical Security Services Division and then the Group IT Security Division. And after taking over as head of Group Security Services in 2014, he held the position of Chief Security Officer of the Deutsche Telekom Group. He has been head of internal security and cyber defense at Telecom Security since January 2017, and was appointed CSO of Deutsche Telekom AG in June 2019. I will shortly hand over to Thomas, and then at the end of his presentation, he and I will have a brief Q&A exchange, and then we'll be very keen to take questions from you, the audience. We have more than 600 people registered for this event, so I'm expecting there to be a certain number of people watching this discussion who will want to put questions to Thomas after the end of his presentation. But enough from me. It gives me very great pleasure to hand the floor over to Thomas. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Paul. Really a pleasure to be here with you. It feels a little strange here sitting in front of an iPad and having an audience of more than 600 people behind. Let me talk about the cybersecurity more in a broader range these days. As we experience a lot of different things now in the Corona crisis, but coming back to that later. So first of all, we do have an increasing risk as we're connecting everything which can be connected, maybe a fridge or a toaster or whatever is in these days connected to the internet, and thereof also increasing the attack surface in general. If you compare to a decade ago, I would say the attack surface in general was somehow the same, but the amount of devices connected is for sure also driving the opportunities for the bad guys in that environments. So we do have a lot of losses in the economy due to cybercrime. We still have some tremendous trends like phishing attacks, like botnet attacks, which are growing and increasing day by day, focusing on more and more environments, now making, as mentioned, connected fridges to part of the botnet or an online store or whatever in that sense. So it's somehow a digital carelessness, I would say. Maybe it's also the naive phase of the internet we're still in, and we do have to do some homework. So this is the one hand side. This is the serious cyber stuff. But what we also figured out, at least during the COVID crisis, is that we have a high dependency on supply chains, which we never experienced in that criticality before. As we saw, because of the pandemic crisis, there were a lot of suppliers from us producing electronic goods to shut down their facilities. And we were currently facing really lack of resources in our supply chain, or even in the supply of the supply chain. So a lot of things are going to be produced nowadays in Asia. And think about what will happen if there would be a natural disaster or something like that to really destroy the production plants over there for long term, and would take a long term for recover. This would hit our economy here much harder than we expected before. So what has this all to do with cyber? It's very easy. When you're talking about security, one of the aspects of security is availability. And availability is, for me, not on the first hand only the availability of our web portals. It's also about the availability of our spare parts, for instance, of our supply chain, having access to technology. And we need to include these aspects in the cyber debate as well. Otherwise, we will get lost in the crisis. And if I challenge the economic situation in Europe for a moment, we can assume that there is no really sufficient supply chain for electronic goods and for cyber anymore available. So most of the stuff, as mentioned, is coming from Asia or even from the US. But in the EU, we are more the consumers of these companies and these suppliers. Even more, all these suppliers are producing in China or in Vietnam, for instance, and then also depending on the same geographical region. The good one on that is there is an opportunity for us in Europe. The opportunity is that we get with new technology trends like softwareization and decoupling of hardware and software, new opportunities where we can focus on in Europe to become more robust again. So I would say we need to spend a focus, or we need to focus on that, and we need to spend money at least also on that to become more robust, to get more control in our supply chain, and also to form the new champions here from Europe to get more also politically independent. And with that, we would also become more cyber robust as we do have more control. So we have a lot of debates these days on new technologies like 5G and certification and the EU toolbox. So a lot of things to be done, but all of this is about trust and transparency. And the best trust you can have is the 100% transparency. And as more you have under control, as more transparency you would have. So for a good reason, we should really focus on getting at least a portion of that supply chain back to Europe. In the former days, it was mostly about labor cost and energy costs. But labor costs in days of automation, in days of softwareization, is not the only and the major driving factor anymore. Energy costs, for sure, if you produce a silicon, for instance, is still a factor, but this can be solved like being done in the aluminium industry in Europe, which is globally competitive. But we do need to do that. Yeah, we need to take care to get the production capabilities for electronic back to Europe. But more important, we need to focus on developing these software capabilities. As we see with the technologies I mentioned, software-defined networks, SD-WAN, or Open RAN in the next generation of the mobile networks, we do have these opportunities to form new small software companies and develop them to be competitive on the global level again. Yeah, with that, I would say it's clear that there is a way to go. It's clear also that policymakers have to make it happen, have to form the framework for that and support the framework for that. I guess from my perspective, there is sufficient amount of money in the R&D support available, but we need to focus on these kind of industries. The German government just released a 2 billion fund for 5G development to support that. So this is a good example what we should do in Europe to be at least the leading technology provider for the future here. We do have the knowledge here on our continent from the engineering perspective. Now we also need to introduce the production capabilities here as well. Having that said, we will come to a more robust and more cyber secure environment. But therefore, it's also essential to focus on security just right from the beginning. We always see, at least if you talk to smaller companies, that security is more felt like a burden, like a cost factor, which is resulting then that you don't take that serious from the beginning. You will end up in having products with vulnerabilities everywhere in the code. But this can be easily changed. It's just putting that as a functional requirement, so security as a functional requirement to the beginning. So European Union is supporting that with the NIS directive. We do have the IT security laws across Europe. But for me, this is only the last resort, so to say. As an industry, we need really to understand that security is the key differentiator for the future. That security is granting availability, availability is granting an up and running infrastructure, and also granting prosperity for the future, so future growth for that. Yeah, with having said that, I will open the floor for questions, Paul. So if we do have questions.
Well, first, before I open to the floor to questions, I have some questions myself, Thomas. It seems to be that it needed a pandemic for European Union to be more cognizant of its vulnerability to cyber attacks, and the fact that needing to have more European players, not just large corporations, but as you said in your opening remarks, small businesses should be encouraged. Was this a debate already happening a bit, though, but not very visible before the pandemic struck? The idea that Europe had to be more self-sufficient, or is it now just started on the back of the pandemic?
Look, first of all, you call it pandemic. I call it the biggest digitization project on planet Earth we've ever seen.
That takes more work as well.
Yeah. So things which we felt not being possible in the past are now possible. Like this digital conference. Yeah, I've never experienced before having those tremendous amount of digital conference taking place on that short notice. But yeah, I would say we're struggling within the debate on the digital sovereignty. Yeah, we are debating, but we do not act. And we need to act. And the pandemic showed us also in different areas, like masks. Yeah, there was no sufficient supply of masks available here on the continent, which show that there is a reason and there is a need for acting now. And it's not always only about the costs. Yeah, don't listen only to your CFOs. Yeah, listen to your nerds. This is a famous quote my CEO did a couple of years ago in a conference, but there's a lot of truth in it. Yeah, it's you get what you pay for. Yeah, that's also a wise quote. And if you're not willing to pay for that resilient infrastructures, if you're not willing to pay for the price for having the capabilities here on the continent, you will pay a different price at the very end, as we now see in the pandemic with the example of masks. Yeah. Right.
Well, you said in your remarks that in the European Union, historically, we have been consumers of external suppliers in the cyber security world. So you're making the case very eloquently, like a politician might, like a European commissioner might, for more self-sufficiency and reliance and resilience locally, domestically. But what kind of key factors have to be in place for this new European offering to be authentic?
I would say we not only need to focus on the closest topics. So what do I mean by that? Giving you an example, we're talking telecommunications business about that. We do have a supply chain in Europe. We have two champions here with Nokia and Ericsson. That's true, and that's a good news that we do have both of them here on the continent. But the challenge is where they're producing their stuff and where the parts of it produced. So even if they produce here on the continent, the resistors, the condensers, and whatever are produced in Asia.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's bad that we use Asia for that production, but we do need to have a second source. It's not a black and white game. It's not banning all which is coming from a certain region. As I mentioned with the natural disaster example, if something happened like that, and we're depending 100% on a specific region, it will end up in a disaster. Yeah, so that's an old truth for security professionals like me, that we're always trying to focus on having a second option. And I guess it's about, in Europe, about creating that second option for the whole supply chain and the supply of the supply chain, but
Right.
not to get rid on the existing relations we have with the EU, we have with China and other countries in the world. They're tremendously important also for the future, I believe in, but we do need to have these alternatives on the continent as well.
But to what extent, though, are these essentially, to be rather simplistic, business decisions? Companies like your own and other players have to simply make a business decision at the highest level to invest more in this new kind of local infrastructure and get on with it? Or are you looking for also the support of policymakers, both at the national and the EU level?
So I guess we do need the support of the policymakers. Even if we as Deutsche Telekom take the decision only to buy local stuff, it's not granting that the local stuff is produced locally. Yeah, so we really need to drive that more on a policy level to take care that the supply of the supply is also happening here. Yeah, and I guess once again there is sufficient amount of money available, at least for R&D funds. We have huge R&D funds in the European Union. If we focus them smartly for the next and upcoming generations of technology, may it be the 5G and telecommunication, or may it be in the chip industry, the nanometer producing fabs, 7 nanometer producing fabs, and all these kind of technologies which are upcoming, we do have a chance.
Okay, well, to maybe slightly as a follow-up question, and also to paraphrase a question coming in from the audience anonymously, unfortunately, but the person knows who he is. The questioner asks, what would therefore be, either at national and or European level, what would be your main asks of these policymakers? You mentioned research and development funding, but beyond that, beyond R&D money, what would you ask?
Yeah, beyond that, I've mentioned already one point. If you're producing silicon, for instance, you need a lot of energy. And energy prices are pretty high in the European Union. So you can work on that, having for those kinds of industry cheap energy available to be competitive. It's not any longer the labor. So we have the education here. We do have sufficient level of people to be able to run those kind of fabs. But we need to provide the frame conditions. Yeah, so we need to focus on taxes on energy cost mainly, I would say, in their production scenarios, and then we have a chance. And we need to take care not to over-regulate these kind of businesses.
Right. I think we're clear, and you said also in your opening remarks that the new European Commission under Ursula von der Leyen 6 months ago now was making very clear and put senior people like Margaret Vestager and Thierry Le Breton in charge to make it happen. There had to be more what you also called digital sovereignty, which obviously covers a multitude of sins, as we say in English. So, and then the pandemic struck, which in many ways, as you've been saying, has accelerated the urgency of what needs to be done. With all that in mind, how optimistic are you? How confident are you that this is the moment now that Europe will finally seize, or will it fritter it away and lose the sense of urgency?
So I guess the pandemic was somehow a wake-up call and make some things really transparent. Yeah, and once again, the best example for that is the hygiene and protective stuff like masks, like disinfection fluid, or like also medicine. And this makes very transparent the dependency. Now everybody is in a different stage of awareness, I would say. So that really helped to drive the project forward. So I'm somehow optimistic on that. If we now take the right decisions out of the crisis, and there is no need for over rushing or try to overturn ourselves.
Yeah.
We should make a plan for it, and we should follow the plan. And this is, by the way, something we can learn from the Chinese. They have their 10 years plans, and they're following that plan, and they stick to their plan. And this is what we should do in technology development also in Europe. We should make a plan which is not lasting for the next election period. We should make a plan which is lasting for at least 2 or 3 election periods, and then really strictly follow that plan to be able to develop. Yeah, otherwise we would get lost. But I'm really optimistic because of the capabilities we do have in Europe, and because the pandemic digitization or awareness rising campaign, you can also call it, in that sense.
Right. Well, this session, as you know, is not just about European industrial strategy in this broad digital sphere. It's also about the incidence and the growing incidence, as you said at the beginning, of cyber attacks and how we deal with it. We have, hopefully, another question from the audience. Again, I think it is anonymous, but I would encourage people to not just to ask questions, but attach their names. It makes it whole thing a bit more friendly. Anyway, the question is as follows, Thomas. Are there certain technologies that you are excited, quote unquote, by that will help to tackle cybercrime and support cyber defense? And how much of the development of those technologies might be taking place in Europe? A nice segue into the next part of our discussion.
Look, I'm now a cyber security professional for almost 20 years. And I would say we're still facing the same challenges than we faced 20 years ago. It's outdated software in computers. So we're not going to patch the known vulnerabilities. So attackers don't need to use the back door as long as the front door is still open. And that's the biggest issue. So it's, for me, not a question of having the latest and the newest technology. For sure, technology helps, but technology is, in that sense, not solving the problem, only solving the symptoms or reducing the symptoms. The real problem is outdated software, vulnerabilities in software. We're not going to patch. If we would patch them all, and we would patch all systems probably across the planet for sure, not only in Europe, as we are connected over the internet, we would be able to reduce the attack surface by 95% or even more. And then we were just talking about the high sophisticated stuff, nation state attacks, and these kind of really, really critical and serious things. And then we can come to technology, how to avoid these kind of things. But everything we're currently doing is more to clean up the mess we're not fixing.
Right.
For instance, if we see DDoS attacks, so a lot of computers being used by threat actors to create a high amount of traffic on a web shop, for instance. The problem is that a lot of computers were vulnerable for a certain kind of malware to make them part of this botnet, creating the volumetric attacks. Now we're introducing stuff in the networks to filter out the traffic instead of fixing the problem on the first hand. And that's the problem for almost 20 years. And I guess we need to focus on that. We need to fix on that. And maybe we also need to introduce on European level different kind of liability for vendors. So giving you an example, if you're buying a webcam or baby phone or whatever in the retailer, nobody really takes care on the software on it, but it's nowadays connected to the internet. So once you connected it, it stays there for a long period of time, for 20 years, or if you have luck and it's not going to be damaged before, it stays there for a long period of time. Nobody's taking care. And for sure, there are vulnerabilities in. And
is that what you mean when you talk about security as a functional requirement?
Absolutely. And we do have the CE certification, for instance, in Europe. If you're buying a ladder, it needs to be certified on CE. But if you're buying a webcam connected to the internet and being used as a weapon against web shops, there's no certification in place. There's no liability in place. So we need to take the security of our electronic components more serious than we're doing today. And it's not, and the regulation today says telecom operators have to make sure that. That's okay. I'm not pushing that back. We have to fulfill our role as well. But also the end users have to fulfill their role. So what happens if you provide the patch to the end users and they're not going to implement it? So it stays with the same problem. And the vendor needs to do their homework. The vendors need to do their homework as well. So they need to support us. We need to support the end users. So it's more a chain of liability. We need to include all entities dealing with this.
Well, fortuitous, we have a question from the audience, Thomas, on certification. Can you comment on cybersecurity certification and the role of the EU in the process of creating a unified scheme for certification? And what role does Deutsche Telekom play and other large telecom players in this process?
So we're heavily active in generating those kind and supporting those kind of certification schemes, like we have developed within a working group of the GSMA, the Global Mobile Operator Association, a scheme called NESAS, Network Equipment Security Assurance Scheme, which has really the aim behind to have a common certification scheme that not Vodafone have to certify the same stuff we have to certify, Orange, Telefonica have to certify once and once again, which is creating effort on vendor side, which is creating on operator side. So therefore, really appreciate to have a common framework and a common understanding, which is valid across Europe. Will help to reduce cost as well. And this money we do not have to spend in the again and again and again certification we can spend for security, for instance. Yeah, so it's much better investment than just doing the same job twice.
I think we're all resigned to the fact that cyber attacks will be a fact of life forever, and they may proliferate alongside the proliferation of devices, the Internet of Things, all the rest of it, and more, as you say, opportunities for the bad guys. Your phrase, not mine. But do you have any sense of that the gap between the guys in the black hats and the guys in the white hats is shortening or widening? In other words, is technology is doing a good job at keeping up and predicting where these attacks are going to come from and how they will be executed?
So I would say sometimes the bad guys are heading, sometimes we do. So it's always a race, and it will last as a race, I'm pretty sure. But everybody can support, yeah. So if we do proper patching of our systems, it will become tougher life for the bad guys. On the other hand, yeah, so without tough guys, I will lose my job, yeah. So therefore, it's good to have them now. I'm joking. I would be happy to lose my job and then to get rid of all the bad guys, if I have had the choice, yeah, for that. Yeah, but it's basically not a factor of the companies and the cybersecurity professional only. It's a factor for the whole population, I would say, taking part on the digital society.
You talked also at the beginning, Thomas, about trust and transparency, and to be very blunt with you, is part of the problem that many organizations, public and private sector, often public more than private, who knows, are reluctant or have been historically reluctant to acknowledge certain publicly that they have been the victim, the targets of cyber attacks, and therefore a huge amount goes unreported. The issues get bigger and bigger. Do you have any? First of all, is that a fair assessment, a fair comment? And secondly, do you see any signs that that kind of mood, that kind of reaction is changing, because it needs to change?
So it's slightly changing, I would say. The biggest issue with that is that it feels always like become victim twice. Yeah, first when the attack is happening, and secondly if the media is taking over and reporting on it. And we need to get it out of the blame area. Yeah, so it's not really helpful to blame victims about becoming a victim, but it's really helpful to talk about how this was happening to enable others to protect against the same threat. So therefore we need a more openness and more willingness to share. The good one is our claim as Deutsche Telekom said life is for sharing, and we made out of it security is for sharing as well, exactly for that reason. Yeah, so sometime you will lose, sometime another one will lose, but if you all share, we can create a more protective environment.
And is that sharing?
It's becoming better.
Okay, that was my question. Is that sharing mentality developing and emerging more than before?
It's emerging. It's really emerging. And even taking an example out of my industry, So we're really trying to help us vice versa between the operator communities. We have working groups in the GSMA where we really share vulnerabilities and discuss how to fix them. Also how to implement new standards to fix that. Even if we are big competitors at the customer side and the security side, we're sitting in the same boat and we're driving in the same direction. We have to protect the same environments, the same technologies, and therefore it makes a lot of sense to share also information about vulnerabilities and how to fix that, how to deal with it.
And therefore, without being oversimplistic again, both public and private operators are seeing less cybersecurity measures as a nuisance, as a unnecessary cost in their eyes. They are realizing that if they don't do that, they will suffer. I mean, people maybe change the locks, put a lock on their door when they've been burgled, or people take out insurance once they've been burgled. You see that now, that is now happening. There's no need to indulge in major awareness campaigns. Operators know they have to do it without being told they have to do it.
Yeah. So in my perspective, we're working in a trust business. If customers could not trust in us that we handle their data with care, they would not subscribe our services. Yeah. So
Yeah.
It's in our own interest as an operator to invest in security and take the highest possible amount of security into our network. But there's another important point on hiding security vulnerability. If you already mentioned governmental agencies, for instance, if they hide their vulnerability to be able to tap certain communication or whatever under all given legal frameworks, it's a problem, because at the same time criminals can have knowledge about these vulnerabilities and can make use out of it. So there's no guarantee if you're hiding a vulnerability that nobody else knows about it and nobody else is using that. And that's part of the problem we have to overcome.
Okay, we're going to finish soon, Thomas, but a question again from the audience, a kind of broader question now, along the lines, which should be the role of public-private interaction and cooperation in achieving digital sovereignty? And which part of that public-private partnership should be leading the process, if any, or is it an equal operation?
For me, it's discussing on eye level, not dictating from the one side the others what they should do. Listen to each other and sit on a table and find common ground and common solutions. Even if you only be able to solve by that 50% of the problem, you will be much better than acting against each other in long-lasting debates on the necessity of certain laws. Yeah, so for me, it's merely sitting at the table, be more pragmatic on the approaches, instead of just say politically we have to ban these and that. Let's discuss about how this can be solved. There's a lot of experience out in the economy and in the enterprises how to do security. There's a lot of experience in the public sector about how to do security. What if we really be able to put that together on the table, we would get even stronger out of it. Yeah.
And as a PS of that, you feel, forgive me for interrupting, that not just you, Deutsche Telekom, but the private sector, big and small, is getting a good audience with the policymakers, especially in Brussels. They are keen to engage with you and listen to your expertise, or do you have to make an effort to be listened to?
For me, it's mostly easy as working for a huge enterprise, yeah. But the smaller ones to be heard is quite a challenge, and we need to find ways to include them in the debate as well, as they have also smart people with smart ideas and good solutions.
Yeah, and these small businesses spend their time running their businesses. They can't devote too much energy and resources to doing all the external stuff. Okay. On that point, we have to leave it, Thomas. Thank you so much for your intervention, for your time, for your expertise, and for your enthusiasm and optimism as well, which is very good to see in these difficult, challenging times. Thank you so much. I now turn back to my colleague, James Wilmot, who will introduce the next part of the program. Thank you again, Thomas.
So